So is everyone seeing full screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, cool. Our group is getting smaller. All right, so Josh and Sujatha, where'd she go?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry, I didn't
In
see
the dark.
you were in the dark. Yeah. So talk about who you decided your customers were and what you came up with.
Do you want sort of for the group the one sentence overview of the product, or Sujatha, do you want to kind of give the one sentence?
Oh, sure. So the product that we have is an antibody, a new sequence antibody that we have identified for an antigen that is very highly expressed on this brain tumor in children called DIPG. And so we have developed a novel antibody against this antigen for this fatal brain tumor.
Very cool. Okay, I'm curious to hear what your questions are, and if you want to share your screen, you're welcome to do so.
Okay, we had great conversation, but I would say I don't know how many questions we actually got onto, but to get back to your question before about the customers, not very imaginatively, we boiled it down to patients, of course, their family. These are primarily affect children, so obviously the parents are a big part of this, the care team and the doctors, and then this probably could be developed further, but we talked about hospital administrators, et cetera, both the pluses of them having a cutting edge therapy for this fatal disease versus the downsides of having an experimental therapy and some of the burdens that puts on the healthcare center.
Okay, so what kind of questions did you come up with? I'm seeing a screen. Are you sharing your screen already?
I am. Are you not?
Awesome. No, I am now. My monitors did something really weird and it smashed everything on top of each other. So I was digging. So yes. Okay. There it is. Cool.
Yeah. So again, sort of the background right now is that this is a hopeful therapy for what is currently as I understand it, a universally fatal disease. And so sort of the broad questions were, how do providers care for these patients now, since it's incurable? What we assume that conversation would lead to is, what is it like to try futile therapies or to direct pediatric patients to hospice or to clinical trials of untested drugs? What are the providers' hopes for new therapies that are on the horizon? And Sujatha said that there are actually quite a few clinical trials right now, so that people are probably aware of some of these things, but that when they enter patients into these trials, what are the costs or morbidities of these therapies and these undertakings? I said costs again. And then one of the kind of broader general questions was, if you had a new therapy like this, what are the barriers or the perks to introducing it in your institution, sort of the cost, the pathway, approval, and so forth. And then this is a little bit repetitive of what we said before, but sort of what's the broad, what does it look like? What's your experience when you are treating such a terrible disease, but using experimental treatments or clinical trial?
Nice, very nicely done. And I think this is a great example of that. If you could wave a magic wand, how would you like to see treatment, knowing that treatment is going to be required? This isn't going to go away overnight or whatever. This is going to continue to happen potentially. Give me your scenario on how you would like this to go. What could we do? Yeah. So I think that's really good start. And I know we're a little bit short on time, but I wanted to hear from our other group, Chem, Claire. Were you able to get Chem connected there, Claire?
Let's see if Chem, I know he had to take a break. Are you there, Chem?
Hey, yeah, I'm here. Unfortunately, since I was on the road, I couldn't, and I had some connection issues. We couldn't really brainstorm too much on that. But what I remember, what I was telling Claire, is that when we were asking questions with our potential customers, my
Tim
main
did
questions
I-Corps
were,
already, I might just say that.
Yes.
so our main questions were focused on, first, how do they use the device? And the device is a compact CT scanner for head and neck brain imaging. And how so how do they use it in their practice with the existing scanners? And the other main question was what their pain points are, and really digging into those pain points. So those were the starting points, and then we continued with follow-up questions. And we interviewed mostly clinicians and other people, other stakeholders. Like we had one product manager, we had an executive who worked in an ambulance company. We talked with an ambulance manufacturer in Houston. So we tried to learn about how can we make it profitable. And we learned that just making the device cheaper doesn't mean that the whole system will be cheaper. Yeah, so that was basically it in a nutshell.
Thank you.
I liked the way Tim described it when he started out. He told me that he was trying to, the way he approached the questions is that he was trying to learn what improvements the users wanted to see. And I thought that was kind of a nice way to put it.
Yeah, it really is, because again, if you go in with a solution, you've just cut off 90% of the potential conversation. And so that's really an excellent strategy to use. And I know, Shem, you guys did very well in I-Corps, and I think you liked it well enough you're even going to try to go for national. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, we will try. I don't know if I will be able to personally do it, but yes, we will probably put together a group who can go to the national workshop.
Awesome. That's very cool. Okay, so we don't have a ton of time left, and I'm sure everybody's had a long day, so we're going to hop in and spend the rest of our time together talking about something called the business model canvas. And this, I'm trying to remember exactly when this came out. It was maybe the mid to late 2000s, 2008 or so. And I remember when it came out, I immediately went and bought the book. I really like this process. And so I emailed to Melanie, who I think forwarded to Claire, a PDF of this business model canvas. So you should have a copy if you don't have it yet, that will look something like this. And so in a nutshell, the business model canvas represents at a glance an entire business plan, basically. It doesn't represent the thousands of hours and all the work you have behind it, of course, but it's what we could basically call a summary sheet. And many, particularly in the tech world, many companies really like to see your business model canvas, right? So what is it? How does it work? And how can you the business model canvas, when you started today identifying your customer segments, which is over here on the far right, and we're going to talk about each of these in just a bit, and thinking about the interviews and the information you can gather, all of that process work that you're doing will begin the process of filling out your business model canvas. And so this is a really useful tool, and it helps you get a good feel for what are the things you need to think about. And you'll notice on the bottom it says cost structure and revenue streams. Those things need to be thought about as soon as your idea begins to form, right? Because it all ties together in order to be successful with a commercial launch. So we're going to go in and dig into it just a bit. And so, as I said, it really gives you a quick glance, at a glance, what your idea entails. And you can share this with perhaps your beginning discussion, like we were talking earlier about hiring a CEO. This might be a nice place to start a discussion with that person. Or if you're looking to begin to share your business process, your business model with potential funders, and maybe you're not ready to give them all the details, but you have this higher level document that you can use. And it really also gives you an opportunity to think about what kind of customer decisions influence the use of your system. You know, like Josh and Sujatha, you talked about families. You know, if I had a child with a potential terminal illness, how it's treated, what happens to my child would be very powerful. And so they really are potentially one of those an important customers of this. And seeing how a drug or a device is delivered to a child can be very powerful for families and what they're seeing happen or what has to happen in order for this to work. So it's very important stuff. And then it gives everybody just this clear idea of what your business is supposed to look like, including your internal team that you're forming this business process with. Okay, so we're going to divvy it up just a little bit and talk about each of these little boxes on here to try to give you an overview. And I'm happy, by the way, to share these slides with Claire, and she can get these out to you if you want them. So, but if you look at the document itself, on the right side of the business model canvas, that focuses on your customer. That's the external stuff from your business, right? And then the left side really focuses on all that internal stuff that goes on and needs to go on within a business. And both of these come together when you're talking about the value proposition. And that's the exchange of value between your customers and the business, your clients and the business. And you also have to think about, you know, when everybody talks about like CU, the downtown canvas and their strategic plan came up with this goal of being a best place to work. Right there, if you were doing business model canvas, one of your customers are your employees, right? So that kind of cracked me up when I saw that one. But nonetheless, it's an example of your internal factors that influence, and they have to be motivated by your value proposition as well as your external clients. Does that make sense? So there's all kinds of things that all have to come together, and that value proposition, the point of this whole thing, has to merge across both. Okay, so what is the value proposition? Basically, what is the problem I'm solving? So in your case, treating cancer. Why would someone want to have this problem solved? Yours is kind of easy, right? And what is the underlying motivator for this problem? Right? So I made my value proposition while I was sitting here, and I said, my widget improves patient health care and health outcomes by decreasing the time to recovery and decreasing costs by 50% less than the current treatment. Okay, that's my value proposition. If I'm going to talk to somebody, I'm going to say my widget will save you time, and it's half the price of your other solution that you have now. That catches people's attention, right? So your value proposition really addresses what is it you're trying to solve. So Chim, what would you say your value proposition is? What is the problem you're trying to solve?
The value proposition, in our case, the device we are developing is a head CT scanner. And the problem that we are trying to solve is existing devices are portable, but not portable enough. The first problem that we are solving is that we are trying to make a more portable device, address the problems related to portability. Number two, existing portable head CT scanners cannot do certain types of CT scans well, like perfusion and contrast enhanced CT scans. So our device can do it better than those existing devices.
Excellent. And Linda, what is the problem you're trying to solve?
Okay, let me just, so our product, I guess, is an app or type of decision support tool to help clinicians determine the dosing of antimicrobials in patients receiving dialysis in a critical care setting. The problem that we're trying to solve is to ensure adequate dosing of antibiotics in these patients. So with the app, it'll factor in a lot of different patient factors as well as the the pathogens in question to help determine the best concentration of the drug that we want. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, nicely done. And then why would somebody want this problem to be solved?
Well, it would improve mortality rates in the critical care setting. Yeah.
Okay, so your value proposition might be that my app decreases mortality rates through improved access to information, improved something, right?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, you can begin to think about that. And once you have your value proposition, you want to write it down in the middle, and then you can test that value proposition when you're going out and doing your customer discovery, right? You can start to ask questions about, do they care? Do they want this? You know, do they think they figured out some other way that's better? Or how are they handling it now? What gyrations are they going through right now to figure that out? Because they're dealing with it right now, right? They just don't have your app. So what are the pain points for them? You know, all those kinds of questions. And so you can continuously test that hypothesis or that value proposition to see if it's accurate. And you may need to tweak it over time, and that's okay. That's why we do what we do. So it can be really helpful for you. Okay. And then talking about customers, and we came into this in all the discussions, it was like, who are the customers, right? Because how do you set up your interview questions for your customers? And so we kind of break that into customer segments, you know, so who are we solving the problem for? And Jim did an excellent answer to this question just by saying who they interviewed, an owner of an ambulance company. Now, were you thinking that when you started, right? You know, the people out in the field, maybe it's an EMT that has to use this portable CAT scan, right? So you begin to break up your customer groups, your customer segments, and customers can be very, very different. You know, the person who owns an ambulance company, I'm guessing, yes, they want a good product, but they probably also don't want to spend any more money than they have to. So cost might be really important in their value proposition, right? EMTs might be unsure about how much training they might need to be able to use something like this in the field. So that might be a different customer segment, and their value proposition would be different. And how does your value proposition address their concerns or their needs? So there are lots of ways to think about this, but your customer segments, again, and those people, those groups, parents, I heard Sujatha say, families, those groups would go in your customer segments. And then again, you look at your value proposition in the center. Does it meet those needs? Is this working across those groups? Who's going to value this? Is it people? Is it companies? What are the characteristics if it's a business or a patient base? And, oops, sorry. And does it appeal to everyone? Who does it appeal to? How educated do people need to be? You know, on and on and on. So those things, you know, you really need to clearly define this so that you can speak with confidence, particularly if you go talk to any kind of funder, they're going to ask you these questions. And so really putting that energy and time into solving and answering those questions and testing those hypotheses with, you know, your answers as you go through the interview process really makes a huge difference. It makes you stronger. And then when you talk about customer relationships, that's really how your business interacts with customers. And so if you just think about what you do for a daily living, and I'm going to pick on Melanie because I know she's faculty, right? So how do you interact? Who are your primary customers and how do you interact with them?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat that real quickly?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I'm thinking about who are your as a faculty member.
Oh, okay.
Who are your customers and how do you interact with them?
So as a faculty member, my customers are students. They are staff. They are colleagues. They are, you know, the dean.
Yeah, those people.
Yeah, like all of those people. And let me see, I guess those are some of the large customers for as a faculty member. you know, and then if I'm doing research, then I get into other levels of customers.
Yeah. And how do you engage or interact with them?
That's an open-ended question.
I know. Well, so you probably use electronic.
Right, yes, maybe
And face-to-face.
possible, electronic, maybe a phone call,
Mhm.
text message, maybe.
You know, and I was joking today because one of my young assistant professors, there was an article about him in CU Connections today, and he was just ecstatic, you know, and boy, he made sure I saw that, you know, and it was just really cute, and I loved it. But that's an example of communication. In this case, our CU Connections is electronic, right? But it could be a paper medium. It could be a scientific association magazine or something like that. All of those things matter. But as a business, you're going to communicate with people in various ways. And it's critical that you understand how best to communicate with them. A good example, if you're interviewing physicians for a treatment product, you might, when you're doing the interviews, say, where do you get your information about new products and new treatments? That's a really great question to ask, because that begins to help you understand how you need to evolve your relationship with this group, if you will. How do nephrologists communicate? How do they share information across their profession? How do they learn about new products? Is it a rep who stops by face-to-face? Is it through some association communication? Is it talking to their buddies? How are they finding that out? That is so important to understand, because you have to leverage those relationships in order to build a business, okay? And so this is a definite different way of thinking than we typically do in our little academic world, but it's a crucial way of thinking in a business and needs to be thought through. And the channels, that's kind of what I was talking about with the electronic communications, et cetera. Those are the mediums that people use, right? And so good questions to ask is basically, how are we going to tell our customer segment about our value proposition? How are we going to get the word on the street? How are we going to let people know this exists? And where are they? You know, not just how do they like to be communicated with, where do they get their communication, but where are they writ large when it comes to communication personally? And you want to find all of those bits and pieces out so that you can document that. So that's the basis of potentially your marketing plan as you go forward with your product design. And so we had one group, and I don't even remember what exactly the product was right now, but basically they were developing a device that would only be used by scientific researchers. So it was a really necessary widget for a type of research. So their group was academics, right? And so how do you communicate with academics? And so certainly journal articles and peer-reviewed stuff, but then also how do we get this out? You know, so thinking through what are the channels and where do these people congregate and how do you get to them in order to get your widget to go? Because you can have the most beautiful solution in the world, but if nobody knows about it, they're not going to buy it, right? So key activities, that's the little box. Key activities are the actions that you undertake to achieve this value proposition, right? And that has to do with taking it from this alpha prototype or whatever stage it's in and really work through that process so that you can achieve the value proposition for your customers, okay? And you have to say, what does that take? Well, you may need a product distribution system, right? You may need technical development. So what are the key activities you're going to engage in order to get your product out the door? And going from developing a product in the lab to a manufacturing a market-ready product, whatever that product is, are very different things. Mm-hmm. And if you're engaged with FDA, then there's this, as you guys know, lovely extra layer that Melanie can teach you about. But there's a lot that goes on, right? And so there are things like, what are the resources, right? So it's time, it's people, it's expertise, it's strategy. So how are you going to do this? You have to spend time and develop a strategy for doing it. And what actions are you and your staff? It might be the person that answers the phone and talks to the customers. Maybe you need to have technical support set up because your product might need technicians to help with getting it going, or if there's a breakdown or something is occurring. So all of these key activities are the actions that your business is going to take, right, in order to be profitable, in order to run efficiently and effectively, and to really solidify that you have something of value for your customers. And so that is super important. And then these practical resources are also important. Office space, chairs. We have a big fight over chairs in my office because on occasion there may not be enough chairs to go around. Hosting, you know, people and staff, internet, cars. Do you need vehicles, electricity, imaging, wet labs, you know, super sterile room, you know, things like that. All of those practical resources, you have to begin to think about those things. And as you have your value proposition, you're looking at your external customers and you're identifying those needs and what have you, then you're going to start to identify key resources and activities that you're going to need to do. So for Chim, I'm picking on you again. If they're going to work with ambulance companies or owners of ambulance companies, the key resources and the practical resources might be a bit different to engage with that customer to meet that value proposition than it might be with an imaging unit at a hospital that just wants something they can run around on the, you know, on the hospital floor with, right? So those are all those things, and you can begin to figure those out and put them together. And then there's also this need potentially for external companies or suppliers, so your key partners. Who are the other people you need to achieve your key activities? What would Amazon do without FedEx or UPS, right? They're creeping me out when I order something and it arrives like 15 minutes later. I just have to tell you that. But really, what are the suppliers, the key parties that you need in order to make this work? And then the example here, if I sell groceries to customers, I may need a local baker so that I have fresh bread. You know, things like that have to be thought through. And who are these key partners? And of course, that's going to lead into cost, right? And revenue streams as well. Okay, and I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to stop there. We only have 10 minutes left for the evening rather than doing another breakout session. But does this business model canvas make sense to you guys? What do you think? Josh, Chim, Sujatha, Linda, what do you think of this? Go ahead, Jeff.
I think it all makes sense. I guess the only thing I would say is I feel like there are a lot of these different things, pitch decks and this and so forth to put together, and I don't fully in my own head have a great handle on which first or how they all interact, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And I think that's something where I look at the business model canvas as a living document, frankly, that can and should change. So I would recommend anything that you think of, if you will, or that you learn, you know, if you've come up with a new customer segment, jot it down. So this to me would be a practical living document that you're working your way through. And then of course your pitch deck, and Golly's our cheerleader there, I think. The pitch deck depends on where you're at and what you're pitching. So that you may do multiple pitches throughout your lifespan of building your company, for example. And so you may have a core pitch deck that you pull different slides from depending on who you're going in front of and what you're looking for. And so that is really contingent on your project, what you're doing, and when you might need to do it. But I like to think of the interviews, the sooner you start interviews, the better. And frankly, ongoing interviews throughout the lifespan of really getting your product to market is really smart. And so that may change your business model as you go along. You know, when I talked about the group we had that went from a human product to an animal product, as a good example of, if you can imagine what their business model canvas looked like initially, and then they had to make some shifts, certainly to accommodate a whole different arena that they hadn't thought of originally. But I think if it were me, I'd love to see you with a, you know, if we still used pen and paper, I'd love to see you with all kinds of scratch outs and changes and marks all over it, if you kept your first one. Because I think that a business is, to me, is a living entity. And product design and development, particularly in our space, in the world of medicine, is also a living entity. You may be 2/3 of the way done with whatever it is you're designing, and somebody puts something on the market that changes how you think, or there's a new discovery, right? And so that can cause you to pivot at any time, but this allows you to be somewhat ready for that kind of thing to happen too. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Kathy, I have a question, kind of a build onto that. So if you have this business model canvas, we're kind of like thinking through the process and asking questions in this living document. And then, as you said, you know, if you're doing a pitch, then you have some data from there. So then you have the business plan or a commercialization plan, branches off of that. So where those get, like, you know, obviously less scratch out and more formal documents, where you're actually writing this out in a cohesive format to either talk to, you know, people who potentially would be funding, you know, some of your technology and in like a business plan, or if it's a commercialization plan for like submitting an SBIR, for example. And those two are somewhat similar.
Right.
And so that's sort of how I'm envisioning this. And I haven't done a business model canvas before, so I kind of like that.
And I will tell you,
document piece.
Yeah. And in some industries, they prefer the business model canvas to a business plan. It is, in essence, the equivalent of a business plan, because behind that, if you were to stack all the paper, if you will, of all the interviews, of all the financial planning you did, of all the spreadsheets you've done, you know, all those things that you do typically for a business plan, those same things are underneath that business model canvas. And so part of it is the audience. What's really nice is it's almost like an executive summary, right? So your business plan should really, you could, if you had to write a formal business plan, your business model canvas could be like considered an executive summary of that business plan. And when you're ready, if you do need to write a formal business plan, if you've done all that work and you've documented it and you have it on the business model canvas, then you can readily use that to write your business plan if someone wants the formal. And a lot of it depends on where the industry is. Like in the higher tech companies, you can definitely go in with a business model canvas and be good. In some of the more structured formal settings, and I would imagine pharma might be one of those, they might still want that formal business model, that business plan. So I think it's something you kind of explore along with it. But I think this is such a good tool to use to organize yourself, because you have to collect that information no matter what. And this is a really quick and easy way to know where you have a hole and what you need to think about. All right, any other questions or concerns?
I have a question about the value proposition. So the value proposition could be something that is different from like a clinical objective.
Yes.
So it could be a problem that an end user, for example, is encountering that may not relate directly to the actual clinical problem. Absolutely.
And so the language in your value proposition for that customer segment, maybe it is my solution reduces pain by 80%. Maybe from a value proposition for the patient, it may very well be slightly different than the value proposition, but your overarching value proposition should encompass everyone. So it may be a clinical solution, if you will, for your clinicians, and it may be a more lay person described as more lay terms for your patient population, but that value proposition should hold for all your customer segments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and my follow-up question is for clinical objective, we do research and like to demonstrate the outcome and to measure the effect size and all that, the difference. But how do you demonstrate the outcome for the business model? Like how do you show, like what research method?
This is where it gets interesting. So take off your science hat for a second, okay? Okay, and put on your business hat. So what problem are you trying to solve in just simple terms?
I mean, I don't know, but let's say it's a time issue. Maybe clinicians are very busy, so it could be saving them some time.
Right, it could be. So it could be your value proposition is for busy clinicians, my app reduces their need to do research by 50%. Or research on a drug titration or whatever, I apologize. Yeah, you just write it down. But you would have the backup if necessary, right? You would do your testing when you do your verification and validation of your product. When you're testing it, you would have that information at hand. We had, I'm going to just make this up, we had 50 clinicians who do this kind of work on a daily basis use our tool, and we had 50 clinicians do it the standard of practice. And the ones that used our tool did it in 10 minutes while the other people took 20 minutes. So you can have the data and backup that you can share should it be needed or necessary, but your value proposition should be very clean and addressing the problem that you're trying to solve. And in this case, you said time. So you wouldn't need to put all the science in your value proposition, but you certainly want to be able to back up that claim. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because if you went in with science to a potential funder who's just a really kind-hearted soul that wants to do some good work, let's just say, they don't care. They probably aren't going to understand your science, but they would understand busy clinicians need answers quickly to help patients, right? That they would understand. And so when we go into the business side of things, our science language doesn't work in business. And business language doesn't work in science either, But when you're a scientist who wants to do business, you have to, it's like being dual language. It's like learning a new language. And kind of circling back to what I said at the beginning, when I say stress and my engineers say stress, we are not on the same planet, right? So my value proposition, like Kathy needs to reduce her stress by 50%, right? So your widget's going to help my stress. Well, what does that mean? Yeah. So it has to be something that's understandable to the business community and particularly to financial people, because people that are in VC, they need to understand right away. They need to be able to turn around and talk about, hey, I just invested in something that's really going to help doctors and pharmacists or whatever. They're going to save time. And in business, time is money, right? So that's one example where that clicks right away in the business world.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
All right. Anything else?
Well, I think this has really been great, Kathy. Thanks a lot for providing this information. I know, I've come away with a couple of ideas myself on some things maybe I hadn't quite thought about. So this has been great. And thank you so much for giving up some of your time to come and talk with us.
I'm just converting this to PDF and I'll forward that on. So if you guys want the notes and what have you. And I know, I'll speak for Dimitri. I know we'd love to have you in our I-Corps training if you haven't done that yet for all the teams working through Spark Reach. So stay in touch.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.